Chapter 10, Lesson 1, Squares and Square Roots. Okay, a perfect square. A perfect square is a number that is the result of an integer squared. Okay, so if I take any integer, let's say -8, and square it, then the result is 64, which is a perfect square. Okay, if I take, for example, 3 and square it, 9 is my result, it is a perfect square. All right, the square root is just the opposite of squaring a number. So the square root is the opposite of squaring a number. It's kind of like we're unsquaring it, right? So when I want to find the square root of 100, I'm thinking, okay, what if I unsquare it, right? What times what gives me 10, or gives me 100? And that result would be 10. All right, the radical sign is just that check mark looking sign that's used to indicate a positive square root. All right, so it's used to indicate a positive square root. We oftentimes forget that the square root of something actually has a positive and a negative value. All right, so let's look at some examples. The square root of 9 would be 3. If we just see the square root sign, it's just indicating the positive root. All right, then the negative square root of 64. So again, kind of forget about that negative sign. Square root of 64 is 8, and then I put that negative sign back on it. Okay, this sign right here means the positive and negative values. So the positive negative values of the square root of 4, all right, square root of 4 is 2, but it can actually be positive 2 or negative 2. And the square root of -81 is no solution. You cannot find the square root of a negative number. It is not a real number. Okay, now if we're going to estimate the square root, is what we're going to do is we are going to see what two consecutive integers the square root falls between. All right, so consecutive, two of them right in a row. So let's do an example. The square root of 33. So if I think about a number line, all right, the square root of 33, well, I know that the square root of 25 is a perfect square, and that's 5 on my number line. And then the next number, obviously, is 6, and that's the square root of 36. So if I'm going to try to find the square root of 33, I know that it's going to fall somewhere about in here. And so if I'm estimating it, I know it's between 5 and 6. Looks like maybe it's a little bit closer to 6. And so I would say that it is either about 6, or I could say that it's about 5.8 or 5.7. Any of those answers would be acceptable. Okay? Now, same thing with my negatives. The negative square root of 129. Think about my number line. Think about a perfect square that's close to that. But they're negatives. So let's say the negative square root of 121, because that's -11. But then remember, -129 is going to come on the left side of that. And the next square root, the perfect square, would be the square root of 144, which is -12. And then I would say, okay, well, -129 comes between them, a little bit closer to -11. So I could say it's about -11, or I could even say it's about -11.3, or somewhere along that line.